One of the top skills that successful people have is something that I learned. It took me a while to learn, and actually, it wasn't until I think recently that I actually sat down and identified that this was something I had been doing. It's just, I wish I'd known about it sooner. I wish I'd known about it back when I used to be, really poor and stuff like that. So, hey guys, my name is Mike, and I'm a former New York City bouncer. I used to live in Harlem. I used to live in this. I used to also sleep in the streets before then. And in Harlem, I met like in the George Washington housing projects, and um, and then I eventually went back to school in my late 20s. Studied finance. I did a graduate degree in business analytics and a master's, an MBA as well. And eventually got into a top consulting company and have been doing strategy consulting ever since. I also own my own firm. And something I wish I had known back when back when I was really struggling, especially when I was working as a bouncer. As great of a job as that was, and there's some stories that I share here on my channel. I really enjoyed the work, but obviously it's not something you make a career out of, and I did it for way too many years. But of course, there were plenty of times when I'm sitting there in my crappy little apartment. This was in Staten Island that I lived. I worked in Manhattan, of course, but man, it gets fucking depressing. When you're working a shitty job. Before I was bouncing, when I was making all right money, like $15 an hour. But before then, I was working at Wendy's, making minimum wage and stuff, and I made after taxes just enough money to pay my rent, and that was it. I couldn't afford anything else. If I wasn't, I guess, eating for free at Wendy's and taking home leftovers, I would probably have starved to death. I mean, that was all that I ate, and I had barely enough money for a Metro card, and that was it. I ignored my credit card payments, my student loans. I mean, everything. I just went deep into debt. Had a horrible credit score. But one thing that I wish that I had known back then, I wish I had, I suppose, had this more written out and stepped out the way I'm explaining it to you right now. A top skill that successful people have is the ability to reframe your reality. So, a top skill that successful people have is the ability to reframe your reality or their reality. And so, what that means is that in the case of, my former, poor self, is the ability to have a vision for the future and to begin living in that vision. So it's not quite fake it till you make it. It's more understanding and accepting that, yeah, I'm living in a shitty situation. I have a crappy job, or I have a terrible relationship with my wife, or my ex-wife, my kids, or for most of you like me, just you look around and you just go, man, where the hell do I live? I mean, now I live in a great fucking place. I work really hard to get here, but back when I used to live in my crappy apartment, I used to look around at the freaking yellow walls that had nicotine stains from cigarette smoke from other people before, and the nasty, dirty little carpet and everything. The paint, the walls have been painted so many times you can see the cake layering up on the frames and stuff like that. You're living in this crappy apartment. You have a shitty job. You have no money. If you can sit down, and this is what one of the things that I did is sit down and start thinking about, where do you want to be? Where are you going to be in the future? And so very simply, I would say I'm going to be rich, right? Let's just go down that path. I was in a good relationship. I still am, same relationship. So I was very happy there. I was fine, with my love life, but money wise, I didn't have anything. I didn't feel like a man because I couldn't pay for dates. I couldn't take my girl out, nothing like that. And so that's depressing. But I started living in a reality, in a world where I'm going to be wealthy someday. And I went out and I would buy a book, and I would go to nice places outside of my shitty apartment, outside of the shitty whole borough of Staten Island. Really wasn't that great, for me at least. I lived, next to the projects as well on the North Shore, so I didn't live anywhere really nice. But I would go into Manhattan, and specifically I would go to Trump Tower, and I would sit in the lobby there with all the golden escalators and beautiful marble walls and things like that. And I would sit there with all these rich people who live there, coming off the elevators from their $1 million, multi-million-dollar penthouses and condos, and I would just sit there in the lobby, and they had a free space for public public seating, and they had I think a Starbucks on the second floor, and I would just buy myself a coffee or a tea, and I would just sit there and read, I don't say self-help books, but pretty much things like that, self-help books, business books, just kind of learn about what it takes, or what it is that wealthy people do, what do rich people do, and how do they think. More importantly is their thought process, and how do they think about life, how do they go through life. And I would read the book, and I would think over my future. What do I want? Now, one of the traps that I fell into, that many of you might already be in, is you go, yeah, Mike, I know, I want to be rich. I want to, build the biggest landscaping business in my city, or I'm going to become a personal fitness trainer. I'm going to be an online trainer. I'm going to start an SMMA or something like that, right? You have these things. Problem is that what I fell into, and that you have fallen into, is you fall into that dream state where you're like, this is what I'm going to have in the future, and you get stuck in the planning phase. You get all motivated, you buy a book, you get this book, and you're gonna sit there and you're gonna freaking fill it out with all your notes, and you're gonna say, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna get an LLC, I'm gonna build a website, I'm gonna, this is gonna be my marketing plan, I'm gonna create an Instagram account. And you get stuck in the planning phase, and you don't actually start taking action. So you delude yourself into this reality. You're not just reframing your reality, but you're deluding yourself into a reality that doesn't exist. It exists on paper, it exists in your plans, and where you've written things out, and you filled out a whole notebook with all these ideas and products you're going to sell and services you're going to offer, whatever the hell your business idea is, but you're not actually executing, you're not actually walking the path that will get you there. And that's what happened to me. I got stuck. Yeah, I would sit there and read books in Trump Tower, but that's the problem, is I fucking did that for years. I'd sit there and read books. I kept doing it for years, and after around whatever time it was, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, I would say, oh, I gotta go to work. I would close my book, and I would go off and do my shitty job. And I didn't actually start taking the steps to get there. The steps in my case, right, were to go back to school. And, I was going to school. That was the thing too, right, is I was working multiple jobs. I had 2 full-time jobs, a part-time job, and I was going to school full-time. I was going to the College of Staten Island. I was taking classes. It was like it wasn't like 7 classes 7 days a week or 5 days a week. It was I forgot, 4 or 5 classes, but one class was on a Saturday morning, another class was on a Thursday night, and another one would be Wednesday morning, like whatever, they kind of spread out. The point is that I was taking a full load of classes, but I wasn't walking the path of like, oh, okay, I want to be a rich Wall Street guy, I really should take school seriously. I was just kind of going to class and I was falling asleep and I was chasing the money that I was getting from two jobs because, it was nice to get, start getting paychecks, from living in poverty for as long as I did. It was great to get $300 paychecks at the end of the week. It felt freaking awesome. Wow, oh my God, I'm getting, $600 a week in pay. That's amazing. So I got stuck in the dream phase and I wasn't taking action on what I needed to do. I wasn't focusing on actually what I needed to do because the real work is hard. The real work was going to school and actually paying attention and learning and taking notes and studying for exams and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to show up to work, get my paycheck, and go home. You have to actually start doing the work. So if your reality is that you live in a shitty life, you don't like your job, you don't like the money you're making, you want to make more. So step one is start reframing your reality by creating a plan for what it is that you want to do. So you say, I'm going to create a business, I'm going to be a business owner, that's going to be my reality. Great. You're going to be a business owner. In the meantime, you have to change your reality by actually taking actions. And you go from being somebody who is working a shitty, minimum wage job like I was, you go to being a person who is becoming a business owner by actually taking the steps to do it. And I'm not saying go form an LLC. I mean, like, create the storefront if you need to, create the Shopify store or create the Amazon account and start buying the products and listing them and actually start selling, start creating value, start getting customers, like start building the business. When you reframe your reality and you start actually doing that, now you're becoming a business owner. Now you actually are becoming the person that you want to be. And you may not be making a ton of money at first, and you probably won't for a long time, right? It's like 90% of businesses fail or 99% of businesses fail within the first 6 months. So you got to start, and you got to start building and working towards it. But you start living in your purpose. You don't just continue schlubbing through life and hating yourself. You can't keep living in the reality that you're in right now, like I did. I was in a really shitty reality. I hated my life. I really wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with the money I was making. I wasn't happy with it seemed like just this desperation, like I wasn't gonna get anywhere. Like, I'm a bouncer, that's all I know. I'm going to school, I know I'm smarter, I know I'm destined for better things, but how the hell am I gonna get there? It's impossible. How am I ever gonna work on Wall Street? Little did I know is that years later, I actually would end up doing that. I actually would end up working with some of the biggest companies, biggest corporations in the world, and working for a top consulting firm. And currently working with great clients, living in a beautiful place. I had no idea that was going to be my reality, or I had no idea that I was going to get there. I suppose I didn't believe in myself, right? But start living in the execution of your plan. So stop living in like this quiet desperation of like, this is it, this is my lot in life. Create the plan. Now you know the plan. Now start executing on it. The second you do, it's when you start altering your reality and you start actually living in a different world. You stop being that poor schlub who's just destined for nothing, and you're actually going to become the person that you want to be. But you can start now. Like this week, you can literally change your life. You can go from being a guy who's living in a crappy apartment, working at McDonald's, let's use that as an example, working in fast food, and you can, by the end of this week, you could be somebody who is actually gonna be a millionaire, who's gonna have $1 million business, who's actually working on it. You're actually working and building that $1 million business now. And you know that $1 million business doesn't happen tonight, it doesn't happen next month, it may not happen for several months. It may not happen in a year or two, but eventually you're gonna get there if you start now. Because look, 5 years from now is gonna happen. 5 years from now, you're gonna open up your eyes one morning and say, wow, 5 years passed since I watched that video. Where do you wanna be 5 years from now? So, reframe your reality. Don't accept where you are and say, this is it, this is my lot in life, and start making a change today. So thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and good luck.